So welcome back, and I'm gonna go ahead and turn it over to you, Sheren, to introduce our panel, and Sierra's gonna be sharing slides for our next panel today. So Sheren, over to you.
Thank you so much, and welcome everybody. So we can all love native plants, and we can recommend growing native plants. And we do with the Chesapeake Bay Landscape Professional Program. That's what CBLP stands for. And through our buffer training program, we talk about how do you select the right plants? Where do you buy the plants from? Can you trust the source of the plants? Is there biodiversity built into the source of the plants? How do we know which ones to pick that are right for the site? And then how do we convince our clients or property owners that native plants are beautiful and they should appreciate them and they are the right plants for them? So if you could go to the next slide, please. We are the Chesapeake Bay Landscape Professional Programs are inherently have a love of native plants and appreciation and knowledge and use of native plants built into our training program. And we're building a community of practice around this. And so the speakers that we're going to have talk today, Joshua is going to talk about sourcing native plants and growing native plants. Erin, Ling's going to talk about community-based social marketing. How do you convince people to, first of all, how do you convince the professionals to use the native plants? And then how do you convince them to convince the property owners to use the native plants? So, and then Virginia Whitmer is going to talk about the program that's been run by the Coastal Zone Management Program, I'm sorry, to develop native plant guides. But I just thought I would show you native plant guide that we developed based on a set of criteria for that could be used by our professionals for selecting the right native plants for the right place in stormwater practices. And we recommend that our professionals go to a site, evaluate what existing native plant and native plant communities are on the site or close by, and use those as a reference landscape. And then we developed these series of cards where the reference landscapes are basically natural floodplain communities, typically a sandy floodplain community, because that's the type of soil and conditions in a rain garden or bioretention area. We also use generalist species across the Bay States because we certify people throughout the Chesapeake Bay region. And then we also wanted plants that were easily sourced. So almost always people say, okay, you've convinced me, I'll buy native plants, I'll spec native plants. Now, where do I go and buy them? And where do I, what are the best suppliers and sources? And then it needs to be attractive. So it's a lot of people don't believe native plants are attractive. They think they're weedy and messy. And so we have pictures that help that the pros can use for visual cues, but also they can show to their clients. And then on the back of every card, we have what is the seasonal maintenance associated with that particular species. And somebody asked wondering about grasses. Well, because these are floodplain communities and kind of wooded floodplain communities, we have the ground cover layers. In fact, that's often what is used in the bioretention facilities. So we have grasses and sedges and perennials that do well in these environments. So anyway, this is an example of a resource that promotes the use, knowledge, and also can be used to provide to growers as a list of plants that they might like to grow. So Joshua's McLaughlin is next, and he's gonna talk about his perspective on love of natives from a grower's perspective, a source.
Thank you, Sheren. Much appreciative of that. Can everybody hear me okay? I'm not
Yep.
new on this. I'm new on this whole Zoom presentation thing, so I'm still trying to learn it.
Sound great.
Good. Again, my name is Josh McLaughlin. I'm the manager of Augusta Forestry Center here in Cremora, Virginia, which is in northeast Augusta County. So we are actually in the Shenandoah, or we're actually in the Potomac watershed here where we're located. Next slide, please. There's some transition in the slides, so just keep clicking. I forgot to take those out. So I'm going to give you an overview of the nursery practices, what species we sell, some sell seedlings, and if we got time, we'll do questions. When we break out to the breakout session. Next slide, please. So the nursery here in Cremora was established in 1967. It's 190 acres, and we irrigate out of the South River. So I always joke around with people and tell them the South River is the South Fork of the Shenandoah. We roughly plant anywhere between 17 and 25 acres of seedlings a year. This year is a 25-acre seedling year. Next slide, please. And so we produce over 40 to 50 species. And that's just a view of one of our fields. That's block one, where we have a bunch of northern red oak planted. And you can see the mountains in the background. So it's a wonderful office setting, if you get what I mean. Next slide, please. So give you core activities by season. Go ahead and click the transition. So during the summer, we do a lot of irrigation, a lot of weed control, a lot of weedings done by hand weeding. Thanks to the Chesapeake Bay Foundation for setting up a bunch of volunteer weeding this past summer. A lot of insect control. We have Japanese beetles attached to these trees a lot during the season. Fertilization, we do a lot of liquid and granulated fertilizer, get these trees to grow. And then we also prepare ground for fall fumigation. And that's mainly the summertime routine. Next slide, please. So the core activity by season transition. The fall we're fumigating. And then after we fumigate, which we fumigate because we're doing bare root seedling. So we want to make sure that everything's taken care of in the soil. We do in the spring, when we fertilize, we will actually add mycorrhizas back to the soil. So we want to make sure when we fumigate, we're killing goods and bad. So we want to make sure we put the goods back. We also collect seed in the fall. A lot of our acorn, walnut collections are happening then. Here last week, we started sowing seed in the crop. So the Mountain Valley team helped us plant some acorns and walnuts last week. And we appreciate that from them. But to get a perspective on how much we're sowing anywhere from, I think we did 3 tons of white oak acorns last year, or no, just last week. So 3 tons of that. I see a question about when DOF fumigates, what does that entail? What that entails with fumigation is we actually have an exemption in the Code of Virginia to use methyl bromide and chloropictin as a soil fumigant. So the ground is actually injected and covered with plastic for 7 days. So next, keep going. The core activity by season, the winter, that's mainly, we'll do a little bit in December, mainly January, February, March. We will start pulling trees out of the ground. We will, which is lifting. We'll start grading. That's where the trees are counted, and they'll be counted by hand and inspected. And then we will be shipping out seedlings. So anybody's been here knows if you get a big quantity, you come upstairs. If you get a small quantity, you go downstairs. Next slide, please. And hit the transition. So spring, we're also sowing some species in the spring. We try to mimic what nature does. And so like I said, we plant the acorns in the fall because that's when they fall off the tree. We'll spring sow, and a lot of things that we spring sow are things like sycamore and river birch and red maple. in those. And then we have a rule here at the nursery, nothing goes unplanted. So we will not leave open ground. We will plant some form of cover crop, even if it is like the winter cover crop right now we got on the ground is just rye seed. We always want to keep some type of organic matter in that soil. And during that springtime, we're also cleaning seed if we need to and doing seed treatment, because our pine nursery in Sussex County, we do a lot of, we treat our seed with fungicides before they plant. Next slide. So what species? We have a lot of different soft mass species. You can see they're on the list. And we're always willing to make changes if we need to and add different species. Next slide, please. And we got different hard mass species. Of course, that list is very long, and that's why I put that many more on there. Next slide. And what I always put this in here because people want to know, do you grow dogwoods? Do you grow redbud? Because those are some of the ones that sell the most. So I want to let everybody see what we have right there on that for the dogwoods. And yes, we do have redbud. Redbud is not we don't have a lot of them this year because seed was a hard thing to get a hold of last year. A lot of empty bean pods last year. Next slide, please. So what species still? Softwood. We're talking about different pines that we have because I know a lot of riparian buffers do plant some pines in it. So I'd like to let people know what pines we offer that are native here to Virginia. Next slide. I always like to put this in here. This is a loblolly planting job that we were walking several years ago. So I just like to show people that this job was planted with DOF trees and needs a good thinning, but it looks good. Next slide. And who do we sell to? There's going to be transitions through this whole of them. Private landowners, which is just anybody, forestry companies, coal companies that do coal mine reclamation there in Virginia, West Virginia, cooperative extension. So Adam Downey and his group buy a lot of trees, and then government agencies buy from us. So the one snippet that I'd give people is just check out our website, buyvirginiatrees.com. That will list all the species we have, which you know what the pricings are, which is on the next slide. Next slide, please. So how much are they? This just gives you a little snippet. This is the hard mass persimmon prices to give you an idea of how much they are. So I tell people things are very inexpensive. We are not in this at the nursery to make money. We're wanting to make sure people are planting trees. And if we do make profit, that's how we get new equipment. But our goal is, as a self-supporting part of the Department of Forestry, we need to make money to keep ourselves going. And so if you don't remember anything from what I say today, is buy trees so we can keep this going. Next slide, please.
One more minute, Joshua.
All right. This just gives an idea of, like, people ask me, well, how much is white pine? How much are the pines? This just gives you a little snippet of how much they are. They're not that expensive. Next slide. So this is one of my favorite views. And believe it or not, this is not in Virginia. But if you ever make it to New Hampshire, go to Mount Washington and sit there at the lake at the basin and it's just there. I put every presentation I do, I always put that in there. And I always tell people it's just a place I like to go and just chill out. As much as I love the view in Virginia, I like the views in New Hampshire as well. So I think the next slide says questions. So let me see. And I think there were some questions in the chat.
There were a couple. Yeah, we'll go ahead and take just a minute or two for questions now. So Sally asks, are there nursery restrictions around native and non-native plants?
All right, we have this discussion every year because there are some non-native plants we do raise. We do raise like Norway spruce and Scotch pine, which people use for Christmas trees. We used to raise years ago, we used to raise sawtooth oak, and that one is one we've discontinued, and we're not raising that one anymore. We always have this discussion around that because, and I always have this conversation with people, like, we offer common apple and crab apple. And if we stop growing natives, or if we stop growing some non-natives, that will also take out the apples trees, because nothing's native to this area. So, I mean, this is a discussion we have. And I mean, the goal in the end is we want to push more natives than the non-natives, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Josh. Rep asks, do you break your planting plots up by where the seed was collected, such as by local ecotype?
It depends on how much we have. I mean, if somebody gives a seed and they say, we would like for you to keep it separate, I'll keep it separate. And we'll try our best to plant it, especially hard mass. Hard mass is so much easier to keep separated than smaller seed. But a lot of times we mix it all together, because we don't want to give people, especially in our loblolly pines, we don't want people to give one, I guess the word I'm looking for is like genotype. We don't want them to get one family of trees. We want to get them a genetic variation of trees that we have.
Great.
So then I see some more that came up. Do you often run out of inventory? Yes, we do. What ends up happening is we try to plant, or we have a plan every year to plant X amount of each species. I think like my plan this year is like white oak, for example. We want to have 300,000 white oak seedlings. And last year, the plan was 200,000 white oak seedlings. We planted enough acorns for 200,000, but only got 60,000 to germinate. So when you're dealing with Mother Nature, you're dealing with native seed, you're dealing with wild seed, sometimes you just don't get what you need, because it depends on the winter, depends on the coolness. Because last year it got warm beginning of April, and then we get that cool spell at the end of April and some cold weather. That played havoc with germination rates at the nursery, because things started germinated underneath the ground. And then all of a sudden they get hit with that cold and they go, oh, I'm going to stop growing. Some of the seed actually rotted in the ground because of that scenario. And I see there was one more, if you want me to answer it.
Yeah, we have time just for a quick answer, then we'll turn it over to Sheren and then Erin.
All right. It says, how many trees do we produce each year? This year, we're looking at about 5 million total trees here at this nursery. That includes conifers and hardwoods. The expansion, we're hoping to get roughly to about 7. With the expansion we're in right now, so next year will be an expanded season. We're looking at about getting about 7 to 8 million seedlings a year. So we're hoping things that, as long as nature allows us to continue to do it, we'll do that.
Awesome. So Josh, if you're able to continue replying to questions, or in the chat roll, we welcome it. Let's thank Josh for a great presentation. Obviously a lot of interest. So thank you. And Sheren, I'll turn it over to you to introduce Erin, and then
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Josh.
So you're very welcome.
Thanks, Josh. Erin, Ling's going to talk to us about community-based social marketing, and really the goal in this type of marketing is not just to convince people to like something, it's to convince people to change their behavior or to take action. So she has all kinds of expertise, but this is her focus today. Thank you, Erin.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Sheren. And Joshua, I smiled a lot during your presentation because I love some native trees, so that was great. I am here to give you a super quick introduction to community-based social marketing. So I do work at Virginia Tech. I work in water quality for the most part, and I also have a background in social science, so I'm really interested in marrying those two things together. So there's a lot of information in this presentation. It will be shared with you, and I encourage you to look at some of the additional resources that I also provided. Those links will be shared, and so this is just kind of a drive-by. So hang on, everybody. If you haven't had your coffee yet, you might want to grab it. So community-based social marketing is just the use of marketing principles and techniques to promote the adoption of behaviors that improve the health or well-being of a target audience or society as a whole. So it's not quite as straightforward as regular marketing, but basically the most important components of this definition are that there is a defined target audience, that you're desiring some sort of behavior change, and that there's a specific process that's taken to understand the target audience and the barriers to adoption of the desired behavior. So the primary goal of community-based social marketing is measurable and sustained behavior change. And here today, we're talking about planting buffers, we're talking about planting natives. So those are the types of behaviors we're thinking about when we're talking about social marketing today. Ultimately, improving any environmental condition that results from human-induced sources of pollution requires people to change their behavior. Okay, so here's some examples in the pictures here. Often, we have a lot of hope and faith in people that if we just tell them what they need to do, they will do it. So a lot of times we will have what we would call an information campaign where we get the great information out there and just assume people will do the right thing. In many cases, we are missing the mark when it comes to that. Humans don't always act rationally, and there's actually a poor association between people's attitudes and intentions and their behaviors. Another piece of this effort is really to think about impact. Okay, so a lot of times when we're doing our well-meaning outreach and education, we think about it in terms of numbers. Now to Joshua, those trees planted is a wonderful thing. So that's exactly what we want to be counting when we're talking about trees. But when we're talking about reaching people with a message, that is not the same as understanding what changed as a result of reaching those people. So what happened, what I like to call the so what. So great, you gave out a bunch of brochures, then what happened, right? So when we think about community-based social marketing, there are 3 reasons that an audience won't adopt a behavior. 1 is, yes, they don't know about it. 2 is they do know about it, but they perceive significant challenges or barriers to doing that thing. 3, this is the tricky one, they do not perceive significant barriers to doing the new thing, but they do perceive significant benefits to continue doing what they're doing. And sometimes this is nothing, or it's the easiest thing. So that's really tricky to overcome. In brief, people gravitate towards behaviors with the most benefits and the fewest barriers. And barriers and benefits may be real or perceived, and they may vary significantly between individuals, which is why targeting your audience and focusing your messaging is really important. So desired behaviors compete with other behaviors. If we want people to plant white oaks, but they want to plant something that they think is prettier or grows faster, that's the conversation we have to be willing to have. So understanding target audience and what motivates their behavior is key, which makes this more of a 2-way conversation instead of a 1-way messaging. So it is harder, it does take more time and energy, but it can be more successful. So this is the process that you're following when it comes to CBSM. And one thing I really like about this is that you can take pieces of this and greatly improve what you're doing. So if you just have a conversation with some folks that you're working with, rather than just hand out brochures, you may already make a big impression or a big impact in the way that you're doing things. You can also turn this into a multi-year study where you really understand a target audience. That takes a lot of time and resources, and you significantly increase the likelihood of making a difference and encouraging people to adopt a desired behavior. So I encourage you to dig into this a little bit more. There's a lot that goes into this, but you can take pieces and make it work, wherever you're operating. So I really love this graph. You have to think about the difference between your potential for reach and kind of who you can reach. So the more specialized and the more specific that we are, the more that it's a conversation, the more successful we'll be. If we're very general and vague and we try to reach everyone everywhere, we won't have much of an impact, but we will have a lot of reach. So we will maybe get a message out there, but it won't have a big impact on what we're actually desiring to change. So I'm just going to go through the tools really quickly. So most folks, and Virginia is going to give the next presentation, which is that's actually one of my favorite examples of the use of community-based social marketing. It's one of the first campaigns that I worked with when I started diving into this. But just to walk through each of these and give you a couple examples of what they are and how they work. So a prompt is really just a cue. So we see these all over the place. Turn off the lights, clean up the dog poop, don't litter. These are just things to remind us to do something. These work best when we're already predisposed to do the activity. So if you don't care about picking up your dog poop and there's a sign, you're not going to pick up your dog poop. So these are just kind of helping people who are already predisposed to do something, do that thing. It's a reminder. Next is commitment. Now this one is really cool, and it's one of my favorites. So places like, or groups like the JRA have used some of this. So this is actually getting a commitment from a person or getting them to do something small, like put a sticker on their car, in the hopes that you can get them to do more significant things in the future. Commitment is best public in groups, and written is more effective than verbal. So this is getting people to see themselves differently and make a small commitment, and you're kind of developing a relationship and some trust so that you can ask them to do more in the future. Norms is something that takes a lot longer. So this is where we actually do affect change in some key people in a target audience, and then they serve as an example or someone aspirational for other people in the target audience. So I think riparian buffers is a perfect example of these. So going from what we thought a stream bank should look like, mowed all the way down to the water, to where we look at a buffer and say, well, this is beautiful. This is exactly what we want to see. And we actually know that wildlife are better off and water quality is better off. Okay. Another example is some of the BMPs that we use on farms, things like stream bank fencing and crossings. Those taking hold as being a desirable thing to do, both with managing your animals and with managing your land. So these are called norms.
And one more minute, Erin.
Okay, perfect. And then finally, we have communication. So Plant Virginia Natives is a perfect example of these communications. So when we do communicate with an audience, make sure our messages are targeted, make sure we're capturing people's attention, that we're using easy to remember graphics and phrases, things like that. So just doing a good job with engaging people around communication. Incentives is another one, just providing a reward for performing a behavior. So these can be monetary or non-monetary. And these are best used when an increase in motivation is needed. And finally, we do have to acknowledge that sometimes there are external barriers. So a perfect one to bring up with the Plant Virginia Natives was the lack of availability of native plants at local greenhouses and nurseries. So that is shifting. And so that took focusing on a different target audience, but thinking about what barriers are there that are external to the target audience that you might need to address. So just to show this graph, which I love, basically we need to focus our energy on the help me's and the show me's. So there are these folks over here who are very hard to convince to do anything. We can't spend too much time and energy on them, but there's a lot of potential in a vast majority of a target audience. So in summary, a lot of what I'm pulling is from other folks. I've cited everything and providing some resources here for you. But initiatives to promote behavior change are often most effective when they are carried out at the community level and involve direct contact with people. We need to utilize lessons learned from similar initiatives and build in local context and specifics. And just make sure you're thinking about targeting your audience and really thinking about barriers and benefits of the behaviors that you're seeking to encourage. Take time to have a conversation with your target audience. So I mentioned all these resources are going to be available to you. And that was a 45-minute presentation in about 6 minutes. So I hope your head doesn't hurt. Thank you.
Erin, that was awesome. What great learning. I'm so excited here. Let's thank Erin, everybody. Really great to hear. There's you had some comments in the chat roll, so folks, feel free to add them. Thank you so much, Erin. And Sheren, over to you to introduce Virginia.
Next up is Virginia Whitmer with the Coastal Zone Management Program, and she has been really instrumental in leading these development of these regional native plant guides. And so I'm going to have her talk about her experience and recommendations.
Great, thanks. Let me pull up my presentation here. I want to apologize in advance because I'm getting over a cold. So if I cough or clear my throat and disrupt the flow of the conversation of my presentation, just as apologies in advance. Hi, I am very happy to be here today. And as Sheren noted, my name is Virginia Whitmer, and I'm the outreach coordinator for the Virginia Coastal Zone Management Program. Virginia CZM is a network of state agencies and coastal localities that work together to protect and manage Virginia's coastal resources. This network is led by Virginia DEQ, where our office is located. The program was approved in 1986 and is 100% funded by NOAA's Office for Coastal Management through the Federal Coastal Zone Management Act. So it's an annual appropriation. And I have also had the privilege of coordinating and collaborating with an expanding list of partners on the Plant Virginia Natives marketing initiative over the last 12 years. So efforts to increase and protect the native vegetative cover that really is undeniably a foundation of Virginia's ecological integrity has been ongoing for decades. Virginia CZM has invested a significant amount of its funding and effort over its 35-year history on land and water-based habitat restoration and protection and improving the quality of coastal waters. So preserving our native vegetative cover is really a significant goal of the program. In the spring of 2009, Virginia CZM and its partners launched the Plant Eastern Shore Natives campaign. The campaign was designed with a community-based social marketing approach to go beyond awareness, to change individual behavior, and to make planting natives the social norm rather than the exception. So Plant ES Natives became a model for Virginia CZM funded campaigns throughout the coastal zone. And Virginia CZM is helping to expand the Plant Virginia Natives initiative outside of the coastal zone, across the Piedmont and into the mountains. And there are now 9 campaigns in Virginia. The regional native plant campaign model was designed based on research first conducted on the Eastern Shore by listening to our public audience, specifically gardeners. Our findings were then validated through additional research in the other regions. And this research identified the barriers that are inhibiting the public from planting natives, the benefits that they would receive by increasing their use of natives, and the outlets through which they receive their information. So you can see here what our survey said and what our focus group said. We conducted both qualitative and quantitative research. It's really, really important to sit down with a group of people. Usually it was 8 to 10 people, and engage in conversation with them. And what was so exciting, I wanted to note about the focus group work, was that after we took all this research and we developed a strategy, we designed a strategy based upon this research, we actually went back to attendees of our focus groups to get their feedback. And they were just so excited to be engaged in that process, to be asked for, for their input, and also to respond to what we told them. We heard them saying, and this is what we've come up with. That was incredibly fruitful. And so the Eastern Shore campaign planning team, as I said, then selected the CBSM methods that would most effectively convey a campaign message that would resonate with our audience. And the messages was, and continues to be, "Their shore beautiful." So the model basically has 3 components. The campaigns work with local and regional native plant providers on point of sale materials to help customers find native plants, such as signage and plant tags, which encourages both the demand and the supply of native plants. And we are also educating gardeners about invasives of concern and native alternatives. Note at the bottom right is a sign put up at one of the retailers' nurseries in the Richmond region, Sneed's Nursery and Garden Center. And Sneed's actually volunteered. They became a partner in our campaign, the Plant RVA Natives campaign. And they made the decision based upon that partnership to put up a sign, to make the decision to stop selling invasives in 2019, and to let the public know that they were no longer selling those invasives, and specifically what those invasives are. So we're pretty excited to see that kind of result of partnership with another audience, which we find are not only the people people or the organizations or the entities that, were changing behavior, but also, they're helping us to really get the message of the campaign out there. We collect commitments or pledges to plant natives, such as signatures during public events. And a decal reminds people of their pledge. By displaying this decal in a publicly visible way, those who pledge also help spread the campaign's message within their community. Because again, ultimately, our goal is to change the social norm toward the use of native plants. And so these banners go with us to events, and we ask for people to sign and state that they have made that commitment to plant natives. One of these banners has First Lady Pam Northam's signature on it. So we want to get everyone's commitment. And finally, the campaigns effectively use, I believe, captivating communications to convey the benefits and to increase the knowledge of native plants. One of the most popular multimedia pieces that as part of our campaign strategies is the Regional Native Plant Guide. And one of the reasons for that was because people, when we conducted our research, said that they did not know what was native to their region. And so these native plant guides are effectively conveyed to people. They educate homeowners about exactly what is native to where they live. So we currently have 7 regional native plant guides published, including 6 coastal guides that were designed and funded by Virginia CCM. And there's also a guide for the Northern Piedmont. Guides for the Southern Piedmont and Southwest Virginia are currently in production. Each of these full color guides highlight about 100 or so species of flowering perennials, ferns, vines, grasses, shrubs, and trees, with a photo description, symbols for light and moisture requirements, and wildlife value. For example, butterfly, caterpillars, and birds, and all other interesting facts about the plants. Indices list hundreds of additional species. The guide also includes sections on conservation, landscaping, right plants for right places, native plant demonstration gardens that the public can visit. Seeing is believing. And additional resources about native plants and landscaping with native plants. We're hearing a lot from people who want to know, you've captured me. I really want to plant more natives. Now can you give me, we need more help in knowing exactly how to go about that. People really want that guidance and that step to step sort of guidance, excuse me.
One more minute, Virginia.
Yes, sure. So each of these regional guides also highlights invasive plants of particular concern in the region and native alternatives. A website, plantvirginianatives.org, is a hub for information about native plants, and it links visitors to all the partners have to offer. The site, which also hosts many of the campaigns, has received about 70,000 unique visitors so far this year. So the growing statewide initiative continues the goals of the campaign work in Virginia's coastal zone, and you can see those listed here. Increased use of plants native to the region. This is, of course, according to the Flora of Virginia, helping landowners more about their property and the benefits of a native plant landscape and conservation landscaping, and how by planting natives, they can impact the ecological diversity and the sustainability of natural landscapes beyond their property, neighborhood, and community. So it's about what they do in your yards really makes a difference, but as a whole, it really benefits the entire community. Engaging with local garden centers in the region to promote the native plants they currently carry and to increase the supply and variety of the native plants that they carry. And engaging also with local jurisdictions on policies that could be favored and, strengthened in favor of native plant landscaping. And we also are leveraging partner resources to create consistent messaging and providing rallying point for partners. By the numbers, although we haven't completed our first survey in the regions to document that we're indeed changing behavior, we really are, we're evaluating the effectiveness of the regional strategy to show that we're on the right track. And you can see on the screen some of the numbers that we're tracking. And I just wanted to note some of the things that we are tracking, for example, are the pledges, the commitments that are being made. And then we'll be following up with those, following up with the pledges that are made online to find out exactly what steps those the people who have pledged have taken. And so I want to end this by saying, finally, you know, you really don't need to convince these Virginia residents that planting more natives really is the right choice.
That's so awesome. Thanks, Virginia. Let's everyone please join me in thanking Virginia for such a great presentation. I am a total plant dork and I cannot wait to get my hands on some guides and what beautiful graphics and connection points. So thanks so much, Virginia. There is a question, and then we have a few questions for each of you. So we're going to ask folks, we really do need your feedback. Amber Ellis is really excited to get your feedback on some specific questions about riparian plant guides. So get ready. Virginia, there's a question from Rebecca. Is the Garden Club of Virginia on board?
Yes, yes, they absolutely are. We have, for example, for the Plant RVA Natives campaign, we have a local garden center, or excuse me, local garden club on our steering team. And I recently just spoke to a representative of the Garden Club of Virginia, the board, who they're just so very excited about continuing to look at ways that we can partner together. So very much so. The campaign is all about collaboration. What can we do effectively together that we can't achieve on our own? Not reinventing the wheel, communicating. Yeah.
Great. And Melissa asks, where can you get a decal?
I'd be happy to send you a decal. Just email me and I'll forward it over.
Great, awesome. Emily, can you put Virginia's email in the chat roll, please, from the presentation? That'd be great. So fun. Look at that direct connection. So thank you to Joshua, to Erin, to Virginia. You know, if you do have additional thoughts, you know, feel free to put them in the chat roll, but let's thank our presenters. And we have 3 questions, simple questions for each of you. As participants, we need your feedback around this idea of creating riparian plant guides for the Middle and Upper James watershed. That has been a specific idea that has come up. Amber, what was that?
Oh, I'm talking to myself. You're good.
That has come up time and time again. We were going to use a different tool called Mentimeter, but we're just going to keep it a little bit simpler and keep it here in the chat roll. But I am going to ask if everybody could get your typing fingers ready, even if you're on a little tiny phone, it would be really helpful for us. So we're going to give about 1 minute for each question, and it would be really helpful to hear your feedback. So imagine a guide. Again, this could be digital. It could be print, likely would be both, that's specific to the Middle and Upper James watershed. That's a riparian plant guide. The first question that we'd love to know from you, awesome, is what information should be included in a riparian plant guide? Is that plants? Is that geography? Is that people? So we're just going to give it about 60 seconds of silence, ask everybody to type something in, and then we'll share the next 2 questions after that. Could be digital, could be print, list of appropriate plants. Great. Feel free to add questions as well. What would this be? What are the public benefits? Great. Great time of year to plant, whether the plants need to be tube or other protection. Oh, that's great. Maintenance or how-to guide, invasive species ID. Soil moisture tolerance is great benefits. We'll give about another 10 seconds for additional feedback. Ease of availability, ding, ding, ding. And how to help nurseries plan potentially for future availability. All right, great. Plant communities. So that is really helpful. Thank you. Agroforestry benefits, stacking our thinking, urban tolerance, great points across the board. We'll give another 5 seconds for the other ideas on this first one. All right, the next question, is Amber going to put it in, or am I going to first? Which audience would most benefit from a riparian plant guide? So that's the second question. Would that be kids? Is that elders? Is it people who speak, languages other than English as a primary language? Which audiences would most benefit from a riparian plant guide? We welcome your responses to that second question. Landowners, folks in urban areas, farmers, suburbanites, great maintenance crews, locality staff, homeowners associations. Non-professional that likes gardening, that's awesome. All right, any other audience thoughts? Landscape architects, rural residents and farmers. School kids to take home to parents. That's great. All right, last question. What species do you need the most for your buffer projects? This is something we've had a lot of discussion around. So we welcome herbaceous plants, shrubs, trees. It can be any kind of species. What do you need the most? Or the top few that you need the most of? Sycamore, red maple, oak. Fast growers, yes. Great. Herbaceous plants where a homeowner can purchase them. So it sounds like shorter things are not often as available as taller things. Hackberry. All right. Any other ideas on shrubs, plants, trees that you need for your buffer projects? Great. Fruiting shrubs like elderberry. Propagation workshop. So easy to propagate. Elderberry. Dogwood shrubs. Okay, great. So feel free to keep putting things in the chat roll. And oh, great. I love it. Mix it up. And Sheren, do you want to wrap up this panel? And then we're going to head to lunch. So Sheren, any closing thoughts for this panel?
No, I think it's a point that we all need to talk about, and guides are great, but really providing the right information and understanding who your audience is for those guides and what the source of the guide is. It's really important. But for me, I think it's hard for people to make decisions from just a list. And so I think a guide could be used for pros working on these buffers, but it could also be used for gaining appreciation, just like our stormwater BMP guides. So, and then also coming up with a list for what plants we need grown, provide that list to the people that are growing them, and we also use guides in like Hampton Roads to have a wish list. We put some plants in there that we wanted that weren't being grown. So are they available? And then which ones would we like to have available? So those are just all great things, but I really appreciate all the speakers, and it's not an easy fix, but it's interesting and useful.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Well, thanks again so much, presenters. Really knocked it out of the park there. Such key information. Thanks, Sheren, for teeing it up and keeping it rolling, and for that feedback, everyone. So we are going to leave the Zoom room open. If you want to visit with each other during lunch, feel free to. We're going to come back at 12:30. At 12:20, Sierra's going to share the screen. So folks who might be joining late, will know that we're coming back for lunch, but we're not going to share the screen quite yet, just so we can leave it in meeting mode. This is an unfacilitated lunch, so feel free to, unmute and hang out, or feel free to go take a break. But we will come back at 12:30, and at 12:20, we'll put that lunch reminder on. And Emily has put links in the chat roll to the Buffer Summit evaluation. That's for today. And the overall consortium evaluation that closes at the end of tomorrow. $50 REI gift card, chance to win. Super important feedback for us. So if you could take a few minutes to fill those out, I'd appreciate it. Thanks again, presenters, and we'll see everybody back at 12:30. And again, feel free to hang out and visit. So we'll see you soon. Thanks, everybody.